In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, ever merciful. In our last session, we completed the present perfect continuous tense. Today, we intend to begin discussing the past perfect tense. The past perfect tense is formed with the past tense of the auxiliary have plus past participle. That is, this tense is formed with had and the past participle. Affirmative, I had worked. Negative, I had not worked. Interrogative, had I worked. Negative interrogative, had I not worked. Use. The past perfect tense. The past perfect is the past equivalent of the present perfect. Present. Anne has just left. If you hurry, you will catch her. Past. When I arrived, Anne had just left. Present. I have lost my case. Past. He had lost his case and had to borrow Tom's pajamas. Unlike the present perfect, the past perfect is not restricted to actions whose time is not mentioned. We could therefore say he had left his case on the 4:40 train. The present perfect can be used with since, for, always, etc. For an action which began in the past and is still continuing or has only just finished. The past perfect can be used similarly for an action which began before the time of speaking in the past and A was still continuing at that time, or B stopped at that time or just before it. But note that the past perfect can also be used for an action which is stopped sometime before the time of speaking. Examples of type A, B and C are given below. Bill was in uniform when I met him. He had been a soldier for 10 years, or he had been a soldier since he was 17 and planned to stay in the army till he was 30. Anne had lived in a cottage for 60 years, or ever since she was born, and had no wish to move to a tower block. The past perfect continuous tense had been living would also be possible here. B. The old oak tree which had stood in the churchyard for 300 years, or the old oak tree which had stood in the churchyard since before the church was built, suddenly crushed to the ground. The past perfect continuous tense had been standing would also be possible here. Peter, who had waited for an hour, who had waited since 10 o'clock, was very angry with his sister when she eventually turned up. Had been waiting would also be possible. He had served in the army for 10 years. Then he retired and married. His children were now at school. Here we cannot use either since or the past perfect continuous. Note also that the past perfect here has no present perfect equivalent. If we put the last verb in this sentence into the present tense, the other tenses will change to the simple past. He served in the army for 10 years, then retired and married. His children are now at school. These structures are shown below in diagram form with the line AB for the action in the past perfect and TS for the time of speaking in the past. A. Bill was in uniform when I met him. He had been a soldier for 10 years, or since he was 17, and planned to stay in the army till he was 30. Bill was in uniform when I met him. He had been a soldier for 10 years, or since he was 17, and planned to stay in the army till he was 30, and had lived in a cottage for 60 years ever since she was born, and had no wish to move to a tower block. The past perfect continuous had been living would also be possible. B. The old oak tree which had stood in the churchyard for 300 years, or since the church was built, suddenly suddenly crashed to the ground. The past perfect had been standing would also be possible. Peter, who had waited for an hour, since he waited since 10 o'clock, was very angry with his sister when she eventually turned up. Had been waiting is also possible. He had served in the army for 10 years. Then he retired and married. His children were now at school. Here we cannot use either since or the past continuous. Note also that the past perfect here has no present perfect equivalent. If we put the last verb in the sentence into the present tense, the other tenses will change to the past. He served in the army for 10 years, then retired and married. His children are now at school. The past perfect is also the past equivalent of the simple past and is used when the narrator or subject looks back on earlier action from a certain point in the past. Tom was 23 when our story begins. His father had died 5 years before, and since then Tom had lived alone. His father had advised him not to get married till he was 35, and Tom intended to follow this advice. I had just poured myself a glass of beer when the phone rang. When I came back from answering it, the glass was empty. Somebody had drunk the beer or thrown it away. He met her in Paris in 1977. He had last seen her 10 years before. Her hair had been grey then. Now it was white. Or he met her in 67 and again 10 years later. Her hair, which had been grey at their first meeting, was now white. But if we merely give the events in order in which they occurred, no past perfect is necessary. Tom's father died when Tom was 18. Before he died, he advised Tom not to marry till he was 35. And Tom at 23 still intended to follow this advice. He met her first in 1967 when her hair was grey. He met her again in 1977. He didn't meet her again till 1977. Her hair was now white. There is no looking back in the above two examples, so no reason for the past perfect. Note the difference of meaning in the following examples. She heard voices and realized that there were 3 people in the next room. He heard voices and realized that there were 3 people in the next room. She saw empty glasses and cups and realized that there 3 people had been in the room. They were no longer there. He arrived at 2:30 and was told to wait in the VIP lounge. He arrived at 2:30. He had been told to wait in the VIP lounge. In the third example, he received his instructions after his arrival. In the fourth, he received them before arrival, possibly before the journey started. In our next session, we intend to continue discussing the past perfect tense. So please wait for the next session.